Well, hey guys, Tucket here. Today we're joined by Sam Keats, the lead solo dev of Sanctum Breach. We've got some gameplay provided by Sam in the background. Do you want to just quickly explain who you are, what the game is, then we'll get into some questions?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, Sam Keats. um, Long-term ARPG player, short-term dev. I've been doing game development for about coming on to 4 years now. It was kind of like a career change. I went to uni and was like, I'm going to make a game. And then within a year and a half, 2 years, I had started working on Sanctum Breach. Everyone was like, it's not going to happen. It's too much. Go make a 2D side scroller or something. Um, but I was like, nope, I want to make an ARPG. So here I am 2 years later, and it's slowly but surely getting to be an ARPG and not just some tech.
Did you always want to make an ARPG originally, or was it something else to
Yeah,
start?
forever. Since I was about 11. So yeah,
Uh,
it's been about 15 years that I've wanted to make one. So
okay.
it's finally happening.
What would you say is like the main thing? Because like a lot of us would kind of always say, "Oh, if we made a game, like we'd make the best game, and it would be like this." What was like the main bit where you realized, "Oh, this isn't maybe as easy as that"?
So I gave up 3 times in the beginning. I restarted, like, scrapped the entire project, started again 3 times. The like core like paperwork and design always stayed the same, but from a tech standpoint, when I was learning how to do things like the inventory, skills, movement, all these like systems, that was so stressful, so difficult because I was trying to do it on top of like doing my university work as well. So it was like taking on this whole other project. But I'm past all that now. All the back end is done. It's just about creating new items, new skills, and because of the way it's set up, it's like really easy to do. So
Mm.
the only stressful thing now is when someone posts in bug reports, "Oh, your game's broken," and I'm like, "Oh no, what's happened?" But
So has it always been just you from the beginning, or did you have any other friends at uni that maybe did other things that helped? Or
no, it's always just been me. I mean, if I got stuck, I'd ask lecturers for help and stuff. They were always like really supportive because obviously it looks good for the university if you've got one person making this whole game. So they were always available to help. But no, I've always wanted to just work by myself as much as I can because I feel like the more people you involve, the more the idea gets diluted and it just becomes this sort of like amalgamation of other ideas. Um, that's why I'm quite against hiring people as well. Like if I've got a specific task that I need doing that I cannot do, so like some back end coding for multiplayer or something like that, then I'm open to hiring someone, but I wouldn't want them to have any creative control, so to speak. I'm quite sort of like, this is mine.
would you ever maybe like look into having like a set artist you work with, and then the
Yeah,
gameplay is you? Or
yeah. I think art is something that I would look at hiring, um, because I can't do art, and art doesn't really. I mean, it impacts the game, but it doesn't change the game. It just changes how it looks. So I think that's okay. Um, I kind of already do that. I mean, some people will probably know that I use a lot of assets from the marketplace, but I only ever get my art and my enemy models from one person.
hmm.
And they're like a small team of indie devs themselves, and they just make assets that people can then buy. So although I don't have a dedicated artist, I kind of do in a sense because it all comes from one person. So
So staying on that line, in a world where like all your Kickstarter's funded and you've got like I don't know 30K to just throw towards commissioning art, is there kind of a specific like visual you'd like to go towards, or
yeah, so I have all the art assets that Vulkan uses. The Quixel Mega Scans. I've got them all ready to go. But I'm waiting to get a dedicated artist because you need to basically make them game ready. They
right?
come game ready, but they're not really game ready. They're game ready for like a first person sort of game, but in a top down game, you can get rid of a lot of the quality, so to speak, because you don't actually see it. So I tried to implement them a few months back, and it was causing a lot of FPS problems.
Hmm.
I'm sure people that have played Walken will know that it's very, very intensive to run. Um, and I don't want that. I want Sanctum Breach to be quite easy to run, so people that are on lower end PCs can run it efficiently. So I never want to make art compromise gameplay. But if I
That
had a lot of money, then I would invest in a dedicated like tech. It's kind of like a tech artist that can improve the asset quality.
I mean, I think that's one thing that a lot of people appreciate. I don't know how much you've been following Pee Wee, because I do know that you used to be quite involved in the Pee Wee scene earlier.
Yeah.
There's been a big drama recently with Bloom. We've got all this really fancy new Bloom tech, and it works great for some people, and for other people, they're like, "This is the worst thing."
Yeah, I can imagine. They've never like I don't like talk shit about them because they're an amazing company, but they've never been overly concerned, let's say, with performance. I mean, we all know how long like desyncing and rubber banding was a thing for. Um, like, yeah, it's very hard to fix, but I think they could probably done a bit more, like, to be honest. But yeah,
I
I
mean,
never want that to be a thing. Like, if I ever had an issue like that, everything would go into to making sure that wasn't a problem. Because I
yes.
think nothing ruins a game like performance issues.
I think it comes down to like the devs, and it's one thing I've spoken a lot about with GGG, and again, it's no bashing. Is they're very much, they have a very clear, this is our artistic vision. We want to honor that. Whereas for you, you're very much, you have the gameplay vision first. So
Yeah.
with what is your gameplay vision for Sanctum Breach?
So, in a nutshell, it's easy story that's accessible. If you're a first-time ARPG player, you can get into it, you can learn the ropes, and then it's all endgame. I want there to be so much endgame content that you get to pick what you're doing. You're not forced to run this map because it's all you've got. You're not forced to do this boss because it's the only boss in the game. Um, I want it to be that the player logs in and they can do whatever they want for the duration of their playtime, and they feel like they're progressing as well. They don't feel like they have to do X content to get Y gear.
Hmm. So with like some of these different end games, what would be some examples of like the ones you could choose between?
So there's going to be 7 different endgame modes. There's 6 currently in the game. So you have arena. So it'll just be lots of different styles. So it could be like endless waves, or it could be like a combination of bosses, or it could be only elementalists can enter, only Hex Lord can enter. Then you'll have trials. So they're kind of like mini maps, and they have modifiers on them, random modifiers. So some enemies can be immune to lightning damage or cold damage or extra health, kind of like an amalgamation of PoE map modifiers and D2 um, rolled into sort of these mini maps. And then you have boss encounters, so it's just 1v1 with bosses. Nice, straightforward, kill the boss, get the loot. Beyond that, you'll have Endless Abyss. Sorry, it's hard to remember off the top of my head. Endless Abyss. So it's kind of like Greater Rift from D3. So it'll just be randomized zones with randomized enemies. You kill them, get the items, get a floor higher, and it gets harder and harder as you progress, and it's endless, obviously. Um, then there'll be a crafting dungeon. This is the only thing that isn't implemented yet. So this is quite a big one, I think, for a lot of people. But you'll be able to do this crafting dungeon, which is set up in the same way as Endless Abyss, in that you progress through floors and you get essences and ruins. So essences drop from regular enemies, and then ruins drop from bosses. So with the essence, you craft the base of an item. So it could be the worst item in the game or the best base in the game. And then from there, you use the essence to add modifiers to the item. And then ruin stones, they give a unique modifier to the item. So in the end, you can essentially create sets and uniques for yourself, but instead of having the pre-chosen stats, they can have whatever you want.
Hmm.
Um, so what have I done? Trials, boss encounters, arena, endless abyss, craft and dungeon. Oh, boss encounters. So this is 1v1, 1v2, or 1v3 against random bosses. So in D3, you know when you fight for the rings,
Yeah.
and you get the sort of randomized bosses. They're not really random, but it'll be like that. And you can get, because every boss will have certain items they drop, so you have a chance of finding those items in this mode. Um, oh
So
yeah, you can hire mercenaries in Endless Abyss as well.
that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, it's like D2 style. You can have up to 4 of them. I'm missing one. There's one endgame mode and it escapes me. Hang on, I can solve this. I have it written down.
Okay.
This is the trouble of trying to make interviews like natural without
Yeah.
even being
No,
really
no, it
drunk.
happens. It happens to the best of us.
Duh, 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 duh. Oh, Mythical Trials. How could I forget? Right. So it's kind of like you've got zones, and their length depends on the trial. But as you could be fighting like a phoenix. So the whole map will revolve around this phoenix. So, for example, this is the one that's in the game at the moment. You kill the phoenix in its first phase, and then it will respawn, and it'll have different abilities. And then you kill it a third time, and it'll respawn again and have different abilities. And then you kill it for a final time, and then you get the loot. But then you could have like Maze of the Minotaur. So you'll be trying to find a Minotaur within his maze, and obviously this will be a big zone. But you'll be hunted by his ghosts while you do so. If you kill the ghost, it'll make the Minotaur easier when you find him, but he'll drop less loot.
Mm.
So you have to kind of like make this choice between, do I want the fight to be harder and more loot, or easier and less loot? So there'll be lots of different trials like that, and they all revolve around like a specific mythical creature. So yeah,
So
it's
one thing
fun
you
game.
mentioned earlier that I want to ask about, because it's a very, some people love it, some people hate it. You mentioned immunities. So what made you want to have immunities in the game?
So I hate it when your build is just one button, I'm going to dominate the game. There's nothing that can stand in my way. I want players to have to think about their build and not just rely on this one awesome skill they found. There will be ways to make it so you can have a one button build, because I know a lot of people do enjoy that. But you'll have to work for it. You'll have to convert some damage, or you'll have to rely on passes or items to deal an additional damage type. So that was the main reason. I just think it makes it more interesting as well when you're trying to create a build and pick items and stuff. You have to account for this double damage threat, or even triple threat in some cases.
Yeah, that's fair. So you've currently got the 3 different flasks, and then you've got like the 5 action skills, like right mouse, Q to R. Um, what made you pick 8 as kind of the number of these, the amount of buttons that I'm comfortable with people pressing or not pressing?
So I feel like 5 gives you a good amount, um, a sort of a bit, because I always envisioned it as having multiple copies of the same skill on the bar, which is
Right.
something you can do to bypass cooldowns and stuff like that. Because I think again that really opens up builds to have a lot of interesting gameplay. Um, so I kind of envision people of having 2 copies of their primary skill, 1 copy of their sort of secondary damage type skill, and then 2 sort of like movement skills, or perhaps a movement skill and an aura. Um, that shifted a little bit during design when I was creating skills and the passive tree, but at the core, it still remains that is kind of what I envision players to do. But I've seen people just run 5 copies of the same skill and like destroy the game. So, or I've seen people run 5 completely different skills. Um, so it just really opens up a lot of ways to play without becoming too much. Because I feel like a game like Grim Dawn, for example, you can have like 20 different skills, and I think that becomes a bit too much for a lot of people.
Hmm. How much do you worry? This is something that has been an increasing issue with a lot of games recently, which kind of go too far in one direction, about like the whole RSI issue when you've got like managing 8 different flasks and all these different buttons and clicking 1,000 pieces of loot. Like, what's the amount of inputs? I know you said it depends on like how many skills you have, but like how many inputs do you really want your players to have, ideally?
Um, it's such a hard question to answer, really. I mean, I think it's at a good point now, currently. I think I never want it to be really, really fast, like Path of Exile, but it's just like mashing one button. Or I never want it to be like some of the Grim Dawn builds you see, where it's like you need to be dancing all over your keyboard to be really efficient and procking all these different things. I think I think D2 had it good, really. Like, yeah, you've only got 2 buttons like on the face of it, but because you're hotkey swapping between these different skills, it becomes quite active. But your initial choices are sort of like left or right. Like, do I play offensive? Do I play defensive? And then you can switch in combat. I think that's quite a good way to take it.
So D2, PoE, Grim Dawn, Last Epoch like come up a lot as inspirations. What would be like the main thing from each game that you kind of took that you wanted to expand upon, or like the main thing which you think makes Sanctum Breach different to everything else?
Yeah, so I think when you have an influence, it's kind of like you don't necessarily think I love it for this or I love it for that. It's just kind of like ingrained in the way you design and the way that you play. So I think for D2, it was very much sort of like when I first started playing it, I was quite young and it was the first ARPG I played. And I imagine it's the same for a lot of people, but it was kind of like that journey of discovery and the fact that you could mess up your character and then you have to go back, you start again. And then when you finally make it through all the story, you feel really powerful. But then just around the corner, there's something waiting to smack you back down again. So I think that's the biggest thing that I take from D2, just that sort of difficulty curve. Like it's easy to learn, but it's hard to make it through.
Hmm.
Um, for PoE, it's the game that I've played the most, basically. That I've played thousands of hours. I've raced like leaderboards, all that sort of stuff. So um, I really like the competitiveness of PoE and how much the community are involved, and you can really sort of like get behind it and really invest hundreds of hours into a single build. Like in the end, I plan on having like all these build calculators and stuff like power for building, and like obviously it's community based, but I really want to open up all that sort of that really in-depth like math kind of play style. Um, Last Epoch, I think I didn't start out inspired by them. I didn't start out by designing because we were kind of coming up at the same time. Obviously, they were a couple of years ahead of me. But in game development terms, that's no time at all, really. Um, but since then, I love their skill trees. I think that's it's such a brilliant idea. So I think that's probably the primary thing that I've taken from them. Um, and they've actually helped me quite a bit just with like different feedback on different things. Like they've all played the demo and stuff like that. So that's nice as well. And then Grim Dawn, I think, is just for me, it's kind of like the perfect ARPG that people can just play whenever they want. You're not tied to seasons, you're not tied to ladders. It's just kind of like it's more RPG.
Yeah.
Like it's got that sort of good backbone of story and character development. Like I don't know about other people, but when I play Grim Dawn, I feel really invested in my character that I don't really get in other games. Like in Path of Exile, it's kind of like I pick up a character and then a week later I'm done with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes even less. Um, so I would like to have that aspect of Grim Dawn, but I don't know if I will. I think the biggest thing I've taken from Grim Dawn though is just the pace of combat. I think is perfect. Um, there's a lot of decision making without it feeling boring.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think I don't know if I'm quite there yet, but I would like to think my gameplay is modeled after Grim Dawn in terms of pacing.
One thing you mentioned about Grim Dawn about like not being tied to ladders and seasons. Do you have plans for stuff like that in this game, or?
Yeah. So I plan on having an offline mode, which will be moddable, and then online mode, which will tie you to ladders and events and races and all that kind of thing. More akin to the old Path XL racing seasons, rather than like leagues.
Yeah.
Um, I do plan on having kind of league style events, but that will be a lot later down the road.
Um. So one thing that I found interesting. So I've played quite a lot of all of those games, but sadly Grim Dawn. So I played a lot of Grim Dawn when it was in like alpha, and then I
Yeah.
bought all the expansions, and I just haven't got around to going back and playing it. And I keep saying that I'm gonna go back and play it. Um. But how much of that like investment that comes from the characters do you think comes down to campaign and comes down to end game? Because you said that you don't really want too heavy of a campaign in this game.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it does come down to the campaign. Like Grim Dawn really lacks endgame content. Um, but I think you can kind of get that investment from endgame as well. I think they've gone the story route with it, but
Hmm.
I think investment in character comes from longevity of play, and I plan on having people play the same character for quite a while, because I want it to be sort of like D2 where not like people don't reach max level. Like it's not something that many people achieve. Um, but I want it to always be that when you log on and you're playing, you can you're not guaranteed to get a gear upgrade. I don't want it to come across like D3, where it's like you're just raining legendaries. But because everything's target farming, like set items, uniques, everything in endgame has a purpose in terms of target farming. So if you log on and you grind for 5 hours in the same zone to get this one item, chances are you're probably going to get it. If you're playing at a high enough difficulty, because the higher the difficulty you play at, the higher the drop chances. And it's not a difficulty slider that you can turn on and off. When you're in an endgame zone, you gain points in that zone, and then the more that you complete it, the more points you have, and then you can turn on a higher difficulty.
Okay.
So it's like gaining access, like moving up in maps, basically.
Yeah. So you said that like you'd be going for like specific items or like sets, whatever. Is it kind of like a old like World of Warcraft thing where you've got like your best and slot lists? Or would it be like a mix of rares which are truly random or
Yeah, so I'd want it to be a complete mix, really. I think my kind of idea is that you'll have a few sets, because sets will be 2, 3 items max. It won't be kind of like these 5, 6 pieces. Then you might have a couple of uniques thrown in as well if you find some good modifiers. And then the rest of the slots will be made up from relics, which drop from bosses. They're kind of like 5 slot five affix legendaries, in the sense that they roll like good stats. And then the rest will be made up of like these super rare, like 3 crit chance, 3 crit damage legendaries. Because for people that don't know, you can roll the same stat up to 3 times on common, magic, rare, and legendary base items. So you can have like 3 times health, 3 times mana, that kind of thing. So these rares, for want of a better word, are like truly random.
So one thing that you mentioned, which I kind of liked, and I feel like a lot of games have been missing that now, because you said like you didn't like the idea of too many people hitting the end game. How important do you think it is that there is that aspiration of like one day, I probably won't ever, but one day I could possibly be that dude with like the level 99, whatever it is, barbarian or whatever?
Yeah, massively. I think if you've got nothing to chase, what's the point in playing?
Yeah.
Like there should always be content that is just like, how am I going to do this? Like, if you don't have anything to strive for, it gets boring. Like, so yeah, I think I never, even when people are like in godly gear, they're level 99, like they're maxed out, like there's nothing they can possibly do to improve their build. I still want there to be content that they're like, oh God, how am I going to do this? And then it lends to sort of like RNG and sort of like skill and that kind of thing. So like with the Endless Abyss and the Crafting Dungeon, they will just scale indefinitely. So it'll be very sort of like ladder centric, and they'll be like, oh, can I beat this person? Can I beat this person?
Has there been like from the testing that you have had, has there been something that like one particular kind of endgame people tend to gravitate towards?
Not really. I try and make it really balanced in the sense of like every end game offers equal opportunity for XP, equal opportunity for gold, equal opportunity for items. And I mean, obviously, when I add sort of like 30, 40 different maps to all of these different modes, and there's like 200 different zones knocking about, I'm not going to be able to perfectly balance all of them. Like, that's impossible. No one could do that. And people will find the meta and like optimum places to grind and stuff. But I think as long as that difference isn't too big, I don't think it really matters. Yeah, so I never want it to be a case of like you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and that's the only way to play the game.
Oh, that's fair. So one thing that I find really interesting with all of this is because it is just you doing it, how do you prioritize your time when it comes to like making new stuff or balancing or like fixing bugs?
So for the balancing side of things, I have umpteen spreadsheets, and it's all math driven. I have like differentials for items and stuff like that and skills, so I can see the percentage in which they deal damage and stuff like that. So I know if an item or a skill gets too out of whack, and then I can scale it back. But obviously, a lot of balance comes from watching people play as well and seeing how the skill performs, because I can't remember who it was, but someone from GVG, I think it might have been Rory. He said that when people say a skill's crap, he looks at the visual first, because a lot of the time it just feels underwhelming to play. It's not necessarily bad on paper. So obviously, like if I get a report of a skill being bad or something like that, I play it first. I don't automatically be like, okay, I'm going to buff it 50%. But yeah, I think spreadsheets for the math side of thing is really important. And then in terms of content, I always prioritize bug fixes first. So if I've got a list of bug fixes to do, I'll go through them before I add new content. But then when I do add content, it's quite fast to do. I've got a lot of content. I've got a lot, like a backlog of content as well that I'm waiting to release. Because of stuff that I made when I was in uni. Like I've made a lot of areas and zones and stuff like that. But I just need to polish them and update them before I can release them to the game. But I don't want to overwhelm people as well, and like because I feel like I've already got a lot of content for an alpha. Um, so I just don't want to go too nuts and have like so much content that people don't know what to do with themselves.
Yeah, that makes
Because
sense.
something that people obviously might not realize is that a lot of the time you don't even see games in this stage. Alpha is normally an internal testing phase. That I had to release because I'm self-funding and I didn't have money to progress the game anymore. So I kind of had to get some sales to try and push the game a bit further.
I mean, it's not just that, but also the fact, like, obviously you need the money so that you can live and that you can keep making the game, but also when it's just you, it's a lot harder to test everything.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think had I had like I don't know an angel investor like GGG did or something like that, I would have probably just hired QA staff rather than actually like releasing it to the public because it kind of did hurt the public perception of the game because I had to release so early. Like if you go back and look at the early stages of the game, it was dreadful. Like there's no other word for it. It was like a tech prototype. I mean, you can see the old UI on the screen now. Like it's shit. Like I'm not an artist, so I just had to try and do my best. But um, one of the community members has volunteered to do the UI for me. We're in the process of overhauling it at the moment, and everyone said that it's like a million times better already. So that's just like a small example of like how the game can progress quite quickly.
Yeah. How have you found generally the public reception's been to the game since you've been doing the Steam demos and everything?
Oh, really good. Everyone that's played it has said like good things about it. Like it's like positively reviewed on Steam and all that sort of thing, and like people are really supportive, especially like the Discord community and stuff. I think the hardest thing is just getting it out there. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, it's all small scale at the moment. There's only a couple of hundred people in the Discord. There's only 15 reviews on Steam, like the public ones. There's obviously more from like gifted copies and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just exposure. It's just so hard to get anything out there, really. But thank you for doing this.
That's
It's
right.
like things like this that help. It's just word of mouth, really. I
Yeah.
don't have a AAA marketing budget to make all these cinematics and stuff, so it's just like poking your friend and being like, "Oh yeah, have you played Sanctum Breach?" But that's it.
Yeah. That was actually one thing that I found kind of interesting, just as like an aside. So one of the things on your Kickstarter is you wanted to have cinematics.
Yeah.
What made you want to have cinematics when you don't want to focus that much on the campaign? Obviously, you're like trying to prioritize money. That just seemed like an odd thing to me to have on there.
So it won't be cinematics in the traditional sense of like these like massive AAA like
Wait, we're not
overdrawn like
seeing
film.
Arthas at the Wrathgate?
Maybe next year,
Okay.
depending on how sales go.
Yeah.
No, I want to go for more sort of like a I don't know if you've seen the Grim Dawn opening cinematic. It's all like hand drawn and really like artsy.
All right. Yeah.
I
Okay.
want to do something like that. So it's kind of like I had in my head sort of like a comic book, like the Marvel opening sequence, kind of like that, but slowed down and with like text and voiceovers and stuff. Because I do have the story in place. I've had it in place for years, but I can't put it in the game yet because I don't have NPCs. I don't have cinematics and stuff. So it's like I do care about the story and I do care about the art. It's not my primary focus. But if I had the money, like obviously it's something that I would want to do.
Do you? I mean, obviously, this is a kind of a weird question, but it kind of makes sense to me. So if it doesn't, just like call me out on it. Do you worry that as the game starts to become like more polished, that you'll sort of lose the indie darling love that you've got currently?
Um, I do to an extent, because I think that we've already seen that in games like Walken. I don't know if you played like the Kickstarter demo of that game, but it was so different compared to what was delivered on release. Like they scrapped so many of their ideas. Yeah, it was just a completely different game, really. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with like publishers and money and influence. I think it warps kind of like your design when you have so many people saying, "Oh, you need to do this," or "You need to do that," because like gamers are very opinionated.
Yeah.
Like I get emails and I'm like, "Oh, this is trash. You've done everything wrong. You need to do this." Like, and I'm like, oh, "Okay, calm down." So I think yes, it can happen, but I'm aware of it, and I'll try very hard not to fall into that trap, so to speak.
Hmm. A lot of it just it kind of also comes down to like just managing expectations as well, as
Yeah,
difficult as that can be. And
yeah,
I think that's something that a lot of, in a way, it's kind of good that you've just thrown so much out there because it's kind of people sort of know what your vision is. But I think with a lot of like Kickstarter stuff, it's kind of like, oh, here's like Act 1 of this tiny game. So in your head, you build up what everything else is going to be. And then when it doesn't
yeah,
reach that, that's when you start getting really angry and you start shouting at devs. And
yeah. I think like it's a good money making strategy
yeah,
to only show like a vertical slice and then let people's imaginations do the rest, but it does lead to a lot of backlash. So I'd rather my ideas get funded based on what I've shown rather than what I've promised.
yeah, that's fair. Um, so the Kickstarter that you've currently got up's got like a week left on it. Has there
Yeah.
been like any main things you've learned over like the 2 or so weeks, 3 weeks it's been up?
Have a budget to pay streamers beforehand. But basically, yeah.
Yeah.
um, yeah. Obviously, it's your guy's job, so you need to make money.
Hmm.
Because when I first started game design, naively I thought, "Oh, they're such nice people. They just
No,
they
we're
just want to help
awful. We're
everyone."
terrible. I hate streamers. Streamers are
I've
shit,
since
dude.
learned that the majority of them will ignore your emails. They
Yeah.
will ignore your free Steam keys. So
Yeah.
yeah, um, no, it's just market and budget.
Yeah.
That's it really. That's all it comes down to. Um, I think if this Kickstarter does fail, I will try another one a few months down the line once I've revamped the UI and polished the game a bit more, and then like saved up a bit of money for promotion. Because like I don't know if you were approached, but with Walken they asked that well they paid so many streamers to promote the game, and that is what led to that like massive influx of player base. And obviously we all know how that turned out. Like the servers died, but so I think yeah, market and budget, and then managing that budget would be my biggest takeaway.
Yeah. It's it's a really awkward line to walk. I think the main thing that I could say just on that thing, because I get you get it's kind of like you always get people it seems like they don't actually want you to play their game. You'll get these
Yeah,
very vague emails like, "Hi, Tarke, love what you," and they the email that very obviously is like they've never watched your content, with the way they describe it. We'd love it if you played our blah 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 blah. Please message me back on Discord, and all these like they try and move everything away from the email, and you've got to go like 8 different steps, and then just like you can't be bothered. But
yeah. It's like that mobile game Raid.
oh
I don't know if you've had any dealings with them,
oh
but
okay. Briefly before we get into like raid rant central, I've had like hundreds of emails from them, but what they do, which is really sneaky, and definitely don't ever do this, is they know that I don't want to do stuff for them now. So when I get contacted by them, you never get contacted directly by them. The emails are like, oh, raidshadowlegends.googlemail, whatever. It's always some like random third party. And they
yeah,
say, how would you like to do a sponsored game? And you're like, I mean, I could do a sponsored game. So you send a message back. And then they will make you send like 10 emails before they say the dirty word. And then it's like, no, I don't want to.
really, you
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. It's, yeah. Maybe that's
Yeah,
what you should actually just rebrand your entire game to something else, and
yeah,
then get 20 emails deep with the streamer, and then be like, oh, by the way, it's Sanctum Breach, and yeah, maybe that's the trick.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a giddy. I'm coming for you.
Yeah, yeah.
But 20 emails later.
Um,
Yeah. No, I'd always want to be upfront and transparent. And if you like the game, play it. If you don't, like, I'll just go cry in the corner.
That's fair. I mean, also just one final thing on that try not to get too dishonored by it. Generally, I find that most people who stream because they're shit at real life. So like a lot of them just can't reply to emails. Like I host Baycast, which is a PoE podcast, and it's hard enough just to get the people I host the podcast with to reply to my messages, and they kind of have to reply to my messages. So I can't imagine when it's like a random third party trying to get them. That's like, ugh.
Yeah, obviously a lot of the bigger streamers do get tons of emails
Yeah.
and messages as well, so it does get lost. But
Yeah.
yeah, if anyone wants to make a game, make some streamer friends first. That would be my advice.
So how long have you actually been working on this now, like in total?
2.5 years, roughly. But it's kind of like it's really hard to say because about 6 months of that was paperwork. Another
Right.
6 months was just creating zones and stuff.
Yeah.
In terms of actual code on this like game that you're seeing now and playing now, about a year.
Mm.
I posted my first video on YouTube. I think it was about 1 year, 3 months ago, something like that, and it was just like a basic like all white mannequin character just standing there using a few skills, and that's as far as I got. And I was like, oh, I've done it. I've made a game. But
Um,
yeah, not very long, really. Not in the grand scheme of things.
like obviously you don't want to like promise anything that you'll then get held to you later down the line, but how long do you like envision you'll be in like the earlier stages of like the alpha kind of stuff? Or
Yeah, so I always try and be upfront. Like I've got a roadmap and everything. Like I think I plan on transitioning into beta in about 2 months, and then full release about a year and a half after that. I don't want it. I don't want to be one of these games that's in like beta for years and years and years. Um, but at the same time, I won't go to full release until we're sort of like it's polished and there's no like big horrible bugs and stuff like that. I think I definitely rushed getting the alpha out, so I don't want to make the same mistake twice. But at the same time, I don't want to drag people on for years and years and years. So,
what do you like want to have in order to for you to be comfortable to say like I'm ready to ship?
so I want to have at least 25, 30 zones for each endgame mode. Um, so I want there to be close to about 1,000, 1,200 zones that you can run in endgame across all the different tiers of difficulty and stuff like that. So think of it like 1,000 maps in Path Exile, basically. Um, then I want ladders and braces and all that kind of stuff to be established and at least have done one sort of like trial season of it, which obviously spans a few months. Um, Polished art, polished UI, maybe some localization, but I'm not 100% on that yet. Um, yeah, just feature complete. Let's call it that. I think polish is the major thing
Yeah.
because obviously for a lot of people it's going to be the first time they're seeing the game in full release. So I want it to be appealing straight away. But it's getting there. I don't think the art's terrible at the moment. I think the latest bout of art updates has pushed it along quite a lot. So
And
yeah.
then it might be like way too early for this, but like what's your kind of like rough monetization plans? Is it gonna be like box price, MTX, or
So there'll be an upfront cost. I don't want to go crazy with it. It'll probably be like 25 pounds, £30 on full release, something like that. So $35, $40. Um, and then after that, I plan on having a yearly expansion. So again, I'll keep that relatively cheap, probably like £10, £15, kind of like Grim Dawn, really, that sort of monetization. And with the expansions, I plan on having it so that they sort of change the way you play the game. So I plan on having alternate stories, so alternate paths to endgame, so you don't have to keep running the same content over and over again during like ladders and events and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, if I can, I'd like to have sort of like cosmetics as well. I'm kind of trialing that in the Kickstarter and just having it so it's like Steam DLC.
yeah.
A lot of games do that anyway, so um, but I don't want to go overboard with it, kind of like I feel like I have it so that Path of Exile had it at the start of their like closed beta sort of stage, where it was like a few things in the shop, but there's no like mystery boxes and that kind of thing. It's like you pay for what you get.
And then just because this will matter to a lot of people, how do you feel about like pay to convenience and like pay to win? Is there going to be any of that, or just strict no? Yeah.
No, completely against it.
Yeah.
I think it ruins any sense of competition. There's just, if you want that, play offline. Have your mod that you press one button and it makes you max level. But no, not online. Never.
That's really good to hear. You seem pretty comfortable with the idea of having like an offline mode that people can like mess around and like cheat with. Why is that important for you? Or like why you chill with that?
So I think that hacking and modding and stuff has become sort of like a dirty word in the past few years. But I think if you're playing offline, you're playing by yourself and you're having fun. What does it matter to other people? Like D2 done it. It never hurt anyone. They still had that ladder integrity. I mean, sort of. I mean, like everyone knows there's loads of bots and stuff. But what can you do? People find a way. But no, like Unreal Engine has such good sort of like encryption and ways to prevent that. So I'm confident I can keep kicking them back down again. So, but yeah, I just I don't see the problem with mods. Grim Dawn has them. D2 had them. Like has them still. Like I don't know if you know like Path of Diablo.
I was actually going to ask you about that. Yeah.
I love that mod. Play it loads. It's amazing. So why would I want to stop people doing that to my game?
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I've spoken a bit to Green Dude, who's the guy behind Path of Diablo. It's really cool what people can do with those things.
Yeah.
There's also, I think there's a complete like D2 Grim Dawn mod. I don't know if you've played any of that.
Yeah, no, I haven't played it, but I have seen it. I haven't really played anything in ages because once you start making a game, you stop playing them.
Yeah, that makes
The
sense.
only game I really play is like League of Legends, just like half an hour here, an hour there of an evening just to relax.
What, you
I
play
know.
League to relax?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I had to stop playing League because it just made me so angry.
I know. I mute everyone. I don't like engage in all that
Okay.
bollocks. But yeah, it's just hard to play an ARPG when you can't, especially when you've gone from playing sort of like 12 hours a day to go and playing like 1 hour a day. It doesn't feel right. Like I can't do it.
Yeah.
So I don't actually play ARPGs that much anymore. I still like keep in the loop so I know what's going on and stuff, but I don't actually play much. Once the game's gone to full release, I plan on playing a lot more because when I'm working on the expansions, it's only going to take me about 6 months out of the year to make that expansion. So then I can have like side projects and I can actually relax because I haven't had a day off in years. So
That sounds healthy. Yeah. I mean, you know, you're young. Hopefully, the heart attacks won't be too imminent.
yeah,
Yeah.
as long as I like people are like, oh, what's a good ARPG? And people say Sanctum Breach, like, oh, die happy. Who cares?
That's fair enough. So when it comes to like the fact you'd want to like promote modding and that side of things, when it comes to like the race seasons, would there be like any prizes for that? Would it just be purely bragging
Yeah,
rights or?
yeah, no, there'll be like Discord titles, cosmetics. Like if I have like a cosmetics store, then people will get points to spend in that. And then if the budget allows, I'd love to do sort of like real world prizes like computers and like cash prizes and all that sort of stuff. Anything to keep it more competitive.
With that, would you? And again, this is like really far out. Do you worry to lot like RMT? How does trading work in this?
So at the moment, there is no trading. There is no multiplayer. It will all be ladder-based competitiveness. So it won't be a case of like grab your aura bot buddy and push ladder. It's solo self-found. You have to do it yourself. Um, I have plans for a multiplayer mode, but it won't be multiplayer like people are used to in an ARPG. It'll be more like an MMO. So it'll be 5 player dungeons, and people will be given a role based on the Holy Trinity, so tank, healer, DPS, and then that role that they're assigned will change the way their skills behave in game. So you'll
Oh.
keep your same build, you'll keep your same items, but they'll get sort of a modification to them. So say, for example, we've got Hex Lord on the screen at the moment using Poison Nova and Chaotic Strike. So that Chaotic Strike, if they're a tank, might taunt enemies. And then say if you're a healer and you use Poison Nova, every time that Nova hits an enemy, it'll bounce off and try and find an ally and then heal that ally. So it'd be very much you have to use your same build but coordinate your new sort of like your newfound skills to work together to overcome harder bosses and stuff like that. And then inside that dungeon, there will be loot sharing, but only on the items that have dropped. It won't be a case of like you can take your items from stash and then give them to other people. So you can work together in those dungeons and distribute the loot however you please, but you won't be able to use it to your advantage.
That sounds really cool. I really like the sound of that.
Yeah, that's like late beta kind of stuff though.
Yeah.
So
So if it's going for like the Holy Trinity thing, so would they be like a minimum group size of 3?
no, it will be static groups of 5 because I'll base the enemy
Right.
difficulty around that. So I mean maybe I could have some dungeons that are dynamic and will scale based on your party size, but I always found that quite lazy. Like in Diablo 2, when you joined and every enemy just gains a increase in health and increase in damage, I think it's like lazy design. I'd rather design boss skills and stuff around the fact there's going to be 5 players. So just a really basic example, say you're fighting a dragon, he's in the center of like an arena. When he uses a skill, like 5 pillars of fire come up, so it's got a chance of hitting every player. So then, like the idea to work together might be to stack as one. So you've only got one pillar, and then you all have to like teleport away or something like that. And obviously, if you reduce the the party size, then you kind of like skew those
Yeah,
mechanics.
you choose the things.
Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I know you've played some WoW before, and I really like the sound of that because one thing that really annoyed me is so I most recently played WoW in Legion, and they had like dynamic group scaling for the raid difficulties. Mythic was still a set 20, but you would have this awkward situation. I vividly remember we were on like Gul'dan, which was the end of like the second raid tier, and we like benched half of the raid group because it was optimal to do it with like 14 people, and it always sucks when you've got to do stuff like that to like try and cheese the mechanic.
my gaming background is I played vanilla WoW right through until Wrath of the Lich King. I was a like hardcore raider, resto druid. I played in Balance. I don't know if you know him, like
Yeah.
quite a big guild. And then from there, I transitioned to Path of Exile when it was in the end of alpha, like closed beta sort of start around 2012. Um, and then from there, I played that like hardcore for about 7 years. So sort of playing like 12-hour days. Um, and then after that, I kind of stopped gaming like that much because I joined the RAF and then left there, went to uni, and now I just make games. So
It's a
yeah,
bit of a
that's
journey.
that's my gaming background in a nutshell. Like D2, WoW, PoE.
Yeah, that's cool. Since you're not playing as much now, but you're hoping that you will be able to play more once you're finished, do you worry a little that you might run into an issue where you're kind of like behind the times a little bit by the time you're ready to ship?
Um, I do and I don't. I sort of worry about it when I see games like Last Epoch and look at what they're doing and how like polished their game is. But then I don't think good ideas age. So I feel like if the concept behind your game is solid and the design foundations are solid, then it doesn't matter if you release 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it's still going to be a good game. Like people still play D2 because the core of the game is good. Um, and art is so easy to upgrade. Like for a lot of people, it might seem really, really difficult, but once you know how it works as a game developer, like I could completely overhaul a zone in like 10 minutes if I've got the art assets ready to go. It doesn't take long at all. It's just clicking on a mesh and swapping it out for a different one.
Mm.
So, and I think art is the only thing that really, really ages. And Unreal Engine 5's coming out soon as well, next year, and all the projects that have already been created on Unreal Engine 4, they'll be forward compatible. So
That's
I
good.
have like this massive boost in art quality anyway. So
That's really interesting.
yeah,
So you've currently got it's like 3 playable classes, right?
yeah, three
Yeah.
at the moment.
What's your like plans with each archetype, and obviously the future ones are coming out depending on Kickstarter stuff. Like, what's your rough kind of like schedule there?
So there'll be 6 on full release, and I plan on releasing one every 3 patches, roughly. Um, and then, so at the moment you've got Hex Lord, which is like a poison chaos sort of like can go either as a mage or can go melee. Like one of the class masteries is that you turn into like this feral sort of like chaos beast. It's kind of like sort of like a werewolf kind of thing, but not really. um, and then that's like pure melee. And you're dashing in and out, and you've got all these chaos auras and like on hit effects and stuff. Then you've got the elementalist, which is the classic fire, lightning, cold mage. Um, Spellblade is I kind of got the idea from Final Fantasy IX, of having kind of like an enchanted weapon that's like on fire or it's lightning or it's cold or whatever. So it's kind of like a mage that prefers melee combat. Um, and then beyond that, so the classes that are still to come is the Warbringer. So that's your beefy, two-handy, melee sword and board kind of guy, all melee combat. Um, but can use banners and shouts as well. So um, you can like place down a banner and it'll give you buffs and auras and all that kind of thing. Kind of like a hybrid of totems and kind of like shouts from Path of Exile. Um, then demonologist, so just pure summoner really. Summon demons and zombies and skeletons and all that good stuff. And then the final class will be the warden, so a ranger. Uses bows and then like animal companions and stuff like that. But beyond that, I plan on releasing at least one new class every expansion. I've got like a list of sort of like 10 classes that I'm ready to put in the game. So like monks, crusaders, like all that kind of stuff as well, like werewolves. I'd love to have like a treant class,
Mm.
so, like massive Lord of the Rings tree, and you can just like swing your branches around and be awesome. um, but yeah, I really want to. Yeah, Spellblade's kind of like an enhancement shaman from WoW. Just saw in the chat there. Um, yeah, I think I want there to be a playstyle for everyone, and class mastery really helps with that as well. So for people that don't know, when you reach level 30, you get to choose out of 3 different class masteries, and it will completely change the way you play. You'll have like these class mastery skills as well, that will really push your build forward. So Hex Lord is a poison chaos sort of like mage at the moment, but at level 30 you can become a full blown summoner and have like a skeleton army. You can go like full chaos and be like melee, or you can go full poison and be purely ranged. So yeah, it really just I want there to be so much choice in the builds and what you can do that you don't feel limited. Because I know a lot of people are concerned by the fact that I've gone with a class-based system rather than like um, just allowing you to do whatever you want. But I feel like it's only limiting if the design allows it to be that way. I don't think it necessarily has to be.
So, what did you think was the main like benefit of going for a class-based system?
I think it provides structure, especially for newer players.
Hmm.
I think newer players get really overwhelmed when they open up a passive tree and there's a million choices and you don't know what to do. And you're getting all these different skills thrown at you and you don't know which ones to go with. I feel like with classes, you can really sort of lay down that you get these base skills and then you see how they go for a few levels. If you like them, you can carry on with them. If you don't, you pick another one. Um, and yeah, I just think it helps. And then as the player learns, then you can really start to open up with the class masteries and the passive trees and stuff like that.
I think the one thing that I found a bit like whoa, because I've played a bit of the demos. I haven't played like loads of it. Was the three passive trees, because you want the offensive, the damage, and utility tree. What made you want to separate the tree into like three different ones?
Again, it's kind of like that approach of keeping it simplified and yet having that depth for the more experienced players. Because a lot of like when I see streams and YouTube and just like talking to people on Discord about their builds and stuff, a lot of people focus on one tree, which is perfectly fine for like your first time through and like when you're learning the game. But then by the end, when you're an experienced player, you'll be dipping out in and out of all these different trees, getting all these different keystones and stuff like that that work together. So I feel like it's taken that massive sort of like, oh, look at this Path of Exile passive tree is huge, because everyone loves that moment when they open the passive tree and they're like, bloody hell, that's crazy. But it condenses it. It keeps the same amount of options and like depth, but without making it too overwhelming.
Mm. Yeah, that's fair.
Because, sorry, just to elaborate, like when you really break down Path of Exile's passive tree, like not many people have. I suppose more people have now because the game's been out so long, but when you really break it down, it's not as much choice as it first appears. Um, it's a lot of like there's very much optimum routes to take on the tree, and if you don't take those routes, your build is subpar. Like that's why there's all these like build reviews and stuff like that, because that is the perfect way to build your character.
Yeah.
Um, and I think a big cause of that is all the stat nodes. Um, but I've gone for a lot more keystones rather than stat nodes. So it's kind of like 5 stat nodes for every keystone. Um, there's 72 keystones on all the passive trees combined. So I think that really lends itself to being able to pick a keystone for what you need for your build rather than being like, I've got to take 30 stat nodes to get to mind over matter. That kind of approach.
Yeah, that's fair. So you've got both skill trees and passive trees. What made you want to go for both and not just one? Or
More build depth, more choice, more ways to screw up your character and not be able to respec because I hate respecs. Yeah.
you've spoken a
Yeah,
little bit
that's
before about the respec thing. Do you want to elaborate on that?
yeah. So I feel like respecs are the devil's minion. They're not needed. Um, I think in ARPGs, it's all about your character's journey and the development and the choice that you make for your character. And I feel like if you're able to revert those choices, what's the point in having them in the first place? Um, I don't want it to be a case of like people reach endgame, they realize their character isn't as good as it could be, and then they just go on YouTube or they go on Google and they type in how to build my character, and then they copy a chart, and then they've got their new character. I want people to think about what they're doing, um, and I don't, I don't want it to be a case of like I need this perfect character in order to beat the game. Like, I think the story alone should be beatable with anything, basically. Um, yeah, you might die, it might take you 10 times longer, but it should be doable. And then in endgame, I think that should be the test of how well you've built your character. And not every build is going to reach tier 10. Not every build is going to reach tier 5 even. But if you can, then you know you've done it well. If you can't, then you go back and you try again. Because the story's so short anyway, it's like 3-4 hours. So I don't feel like players will feel too hard done by if they have to re-roll. I never want them to feel like, oh, I've wasted all my time here because they should have learned something along the way.
Hmm.
Uh, there's a lot of interviews with David Brevik. I know we spoke about this briefly, but there's a lot of interviews with David Brevik where he talks about how he hates respecs, but he puts them in because people like them. But I think if you do it right, you don't need respecs. I mean, I might be wrong. Like a year, 2 years down the line, I might end up putting them in because people think that it's necessary for the health of the game. And I'd never go against, like, say, I've got 90% of people telling me this isn't good, we need this. I wouldn't be like, no, I'm not doing it. Um, I will listen to players. I've already changed a lot of mechanics based on player feedback because at the end of the day, like especially for yourself, like streamers, they play the game so much more than the devs ever could. So by the end of it, they have such a better understanding of how the game actually plays. Um, so yeah, I might add respecs, but at the moment, no.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's very easy to add respecs, but it'd be very difficult to take away. Like there are some things that like once
Yeah,
you've put it in, you can't really yoink it back from the player base.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'd rather start without them and have to add them later than start with them and then remove them. It's the same with like the barriers on the zones. Like at the moment, your character can fall down. Because I always found it strange when playing, like especially with movement skills, that you're just like impeded by this invisible barrier, and you don't have to think about what you're doing. You don't have to think, "Oh, I'm next to a cliff. Maybe I shouldn't teleport here."
Yeah.
But through player testing and player feedback, I've realised that it hurts gameplay. So I will be adding barriers in. So that's just like an example of like the community spoken, I've listened kind of thing.
Um,
All the classes are available in the demo. The three that are available in the main game, at least.
wasn't the Nemesis system also like something which came from the player base as well?
Yeah, yeah. So it used to be a case of that you'd lose all your XP, regardless of how much you had. Um, but people felt like that was a bit too harsh, especially when they fell off a cliff and they lost all their XP. I mean, I was laughing. I found it hilarious, but people didn't like it. So we came up with this system where it's kind of like you you've made the enemy harder, you've made that encounter harder for yourself, but you have the ability to gain your XP back.
Yep.
So I think it's a good compromise. Yeah, just taken from chat there. I
Sorry.
think regret orbs are a good middle ground for respecs, but even then it can be abused. I mean, I don't know if you've experienced this for yourself playing Path of Exile, but you you get to the point that you're so wealthy a lot of the time that you can afford to do whatever you want. So when a new build comes along, you can grab those respecs that cost those regrets that cost hardly anything, and then just completely redo your whole character. Um, so I think yeah, it's an okay system to have where you have to work for that respec, but at some point it stops becoming work, and then it's pointless. Like you can respec skills in Sanctum Breach. You can take them back to level 1, but if you take them back to level 1, you've lost everything. You have to do it again. And that's a system that never changes, no matter how far along your character is, how progressed your character is. It just means that you have to work harder to bring it back. So the further along you go, the more you're punished, if anything, rather than actually making it easier.
Um, yeah, it's one of the, it will a lot of that stuff will just like fall down to the player base. I think a good example of that is there are some people who like when they're playing ARPGs, they always want to level with like the end game build, even if their ungame build doesn't really work while leveling. I've always been one of those players, whereas some people would hate the idea of that and they'd always go for what's the most efficient setup. And when you have full respecs available, then you will have like the cookie cutter. This is how you level this class, and then you just swap, level 50 or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's inevitable, really. It's virtually impossible to design a system in which you can level up with your in-game build, because you have to have skills gated behind levels. You have to have items gated behind levels that enable a build. Um, it's just one of those things. I'm afraid I don't think we'll ever see a different way of doing it until ARPGs completely evolve into something else.
Um, that was actually one thing I wanted to ask you from earlier. So a lot of the like design of the game seems to be very old school, and there isn't. I guess it's changing a little bit now, but a lot of the ARPGs coming out recently have been way more modern in their approach. Um, do you worry at all that maybe like audiences have moved on, so to speak, or
Um, I think they have. I think audiences have moved on, but I don't really mind. I think I never I never intended the game to be sort of like this massive next big ARPG. I didn't like if it happens, great, but I never set out with that as my goal. Like if I did, I would have made it 10 times easier to begin with because the majority of players are casual. Um, but yeah, I think as long as I'm catering to the audience that I intend to cater to, I don't see it as a problem. I mean, if people want other ARPGs that are easier, like D3 still kicking about, off you go.
Yeah, no, like for me personally, I think going for the more hardcore approach is the right thing. And we've been having, again, I sorry, keep comparing stuff to PvE. We've been having a big issue in PvE recently because the latest league had basically it's added kind of like a soft item editor in how powerful the crafting is. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of people who are saying this is fun for now, but we don't want this going to the game core because it like just shortens the item curve by a huge amount. And then there's like loads of people saying this is so good, stop balancing with the 1%, and now there's like this whole stupid like rift that's appeared where like the
yeah.
elitists are now like, oh, this is bad for the long-term health, and everyone's like, no, this is amazing, screw you. So
It's what happened to World of Warcraft, and that's
yeah,
what ruined World of Warcraft. I think if you try and cater to two completely different audiences, it's not gonna work. You need to pick your audience. You need to go with it, and you need to stick behind your audience. I don't think you should ever switch audiences either. Like I think if you spent years developing a game, years cultivating an audience, and they love your game, I don't think you should then suddenly make a shift because a lot of the time that shift is made for money as well. Like it's what WoW done. They were running out of subscriptions, like they were losing millions, so they made it easier because then it brought people back. Um, but yeah, it's not something that I'm interested in doing. As long as the player base that I want to have is happy with the game, I think it's okay. Like
I
I'm sorry, gone.
no, I was just gonna say, I think that going for a hardcore approach, while it is definitely the small audience, you're gonna have a much more committed audience. They'll play the game for much longer, and I think it's the right way to go for the ARPG genre, especially because there aren't that many super hardcore games, especially since you also said like with pacing. There's a lot of PvE players now who miss the slower pacing, and I
Yeah,
think focusing in on that, there's definitely like an audience who want that.
I I think I kind of like alpha and closed beta Path of Exile would be a good placeholder for combat in terms of difficulty. Not necessarily pacing, because I've always felt like Path of Exile was very fast. I
Mm,
mean, once you reached endgame, anyway. I suppose like I don't know if you played them, but do you remember like farming like Brutus?
yeah.
Yeah, and like ledge farming and that kind of thing when they first introduced that sort of like map work system. I think that was really good. Like the pacing then and the difficulty then was like perfect. But since then they've moved away from that so much. Like it's become 100 miles per hour and you only ever die to random one shots from out of nowhere. Um, yeah, but again, like I can't say that it will never happen, but at the moment I don't want that to happen. I think I'd rather start another game than change the audience halfway through.
That's fair. Um, when it comes to the itemization of Sanctum Breach, it's a niche question, but it's something I got from Chad and I thought was quite an interesting one. Since you do have crit in this game, do you worry at all that you end up with like crit just dominating the gearing, as it often tends to in a lot of
So
ARPGs?
yeah, obviously I coming from Perfect, I was really aware of this. Like when I first designed the game, and it was something that I wanted to avoid from the offset. So the way that crit works in the game is a bit different. So instead of it being a percentage that's multiplicative to everything else, it's a flat damage increase. So
Okay.
you have a chance to crit, but then you have flat damage added onto your base skills. So what this does is it enables it to become more of a math problem.
Hmm.
So it's more because crit damage takes up the same slots as like increased damage and more damage. You then have a choice. Do you want to boost your crit or do you want to boost the base of the skill? Obviously, the short answer will be if your skill has low base damage, then you'll want to stack crit damage because it increases the base higher, and then your other sources of increased and more damage will further push that. If it's the reverse, then you want to stack increased and more damage rather than crit. But I think at the end of the day, it just enables another way to build your character, just like focusing on dots does, or just like focusing on defenses does. I don't ever want it to be crit or bust.
Right.
And if it becomes crit or bust, then I will just scale back the advantage that crit damage gives you, because it is flat. It's a lot easier to balance.
I'm aware that I've had you on for an hour, so I'll try and not go for like too many super in-depth questions and just kind of go a bit more rapid fire. When it comes to random items you pick up off the floor, not like specific sets or specific boss drops, is there anything you're going to try and do to ensure that you're picking up meaningful items?
I've already done it by enabling multiple stats, multiple copies of the same stat, I should say, on a single item. It enables you to have these super rare, super useful items. Like a three, like it's funny because of what we just talked about, but having like a 3 times crit chance, times crit damage item is probably going to be more useful than a unique that I've handcrafted or a set item that I've handcrafted. So like we spoke about before, but I expect people to have a mix of like legendaries and rares in with these set items and uniques, even in their optimum builds.
And then if there was one thing that you like wanted from someone playing the beta in terms of feedback, or the alpha rather, sorry, like what?
Sorry, my nephew's coming.
Oh, it's fine. No worries, dude. Family feels good, man.
Sorry.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
He
It
doesn't
happens.
understand interviews.
It happens. Yeah, I was just going to ask that for the people who are playing the game, who are doing this, the free Steam demo and everything, what feedback is most useful to you?
So I think obviously bug reports are massively useful. But outside of that, it's just sort of like their first impressions of the game. It's like, how easy was the game to play? Because I never want people to be fighting against the systems, or I never want people to feel lost in what they're supposed to be doing. I want the game to be really smooth. I want it to be really easy and user friendly. That's why I have like vacuum looting, sell, and all that kind of stuff. Like I don't want it to be hard to play the game. I want the game to be hard, but I don't want the player to struggle to play it. If that makes sense.
You don't want the experience of it to be difficult.
Yeah, I don't want it to feel draining to play. Yeah. I just want it to be sort of like, you know, like when you're playing. I can't even think of a game now. Like a really sort of like StarCraft.
Yeah.
Like all that micromanagement, like is tiring. It's hard, and I don't want that.
Yeah. You don't want people to finish playing your game saying, "I need a break."
Yeah, and I felt like that from Path of Exile. I felt like I'm gonna pass out now if I don't have a brain, because it is just like constant thinking and constant micromanagement and constant zoom. So
no, I get what you mean. Well, what I'll do then is I'll thank you for your time, and we'll grab you up on stream again at some point, maybe in a couple of months, see where the game's at, and yeah, best of luck with the Kickstarter.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right.